My name is Nora Ellis. I'm 30, a freelance writer cobbling together a living in a cramped Boston apartment where the radiator hums louder than my dreams. At my brother Caleb's MIT graduation, my parents stood in front of a crowd of beaming families and announced they were done with me. No heads up, no quiet conversation, just a knife-sharp declaration under the Cambridge sky. They scrubbed my name from the invitations, the program, the family itself. But what they didn't know was that I'd already found their secret, a forged signature, a stolen inheritance, a legacy stitched together with lies. And in the end, they weren't the ones who exposed me. I exposed them. I got to MIT early that day, not because I was eager, but because I needed to see if they'd really gone through with it. The campus buzzed with graduates in black gowns, parents clutching balloons and glossy programs, their pride practically glowing. I held nothing but my keys, twisting them in my pocket until they left marks on my palm. Near the reserved seating, I spotted my parents. My mother, Margaret, wore a tailored navy blazer, her smile as polished as the pearls at her throat. My father, Vincent, stood beside her, scrolling through his phone, one hand smoothing his tie. Caleb, 26 and MIT's pride, stood between them, his honor cords catching the light like some kind of halo. When they saw me, Margaret's eyes grazed me like I was a stranger she'd passed at a fundraiser. "Nora," she said, her voice flat as a closed door. "I didn't think you'd come." "I got the invite," I said, swallowing the sting. She gave a thin laugh. "Must have been a mix-up. Those lists are so hard to keep straight." Vincent didn't look up from his phone. Caleb stepped forward, his hug quick and stiff. "Glad you're here," he mumbled, but his eyes flicked to Margaret, like he was checking how much warmth he was allowed to show. I found the seating chart posted near the entrance, all elegant, calligraphy on cream paper. Ellis family, Vincent, Margaret, Caleb, plus guests. My name wasn't there. A volunteer handed me a badge, plain white, no family crest, just guest in stark font. I'd spent hours with Margaret designing that crest for her charity gala when I was 16, arguing over colors like it mattered. I could have turned around right then, spared myself the rest. But I pinned the badge to my jacket and drifted to the back of the tent, like a shadow slipping into someone else's story. The ceremony kicked off at 11 sharp. Deans droned on, names were called, applause swelled. I sat alone in a corner, next to a kid doodling on his program and an older woman fanning herself with a brochure. Then Vincent stood, took the microphone, and smiled like he was about to unveil a new wing of the Ellis Foundation. "Today," he began, "we honor our son, Caleb, whose brilliance carries our family forward." The crowd clapped, cameras flashed. Caleb looked at his shoes, modest as always. But Vincent kept going. "This day also marks a turning point for us. We're making a hard but necessary choice to part ways with those who don't share our values or vision. That includes our daughter, Nora." The air went still. No one gasped, no one whispered, just a ripple of awkward coughs and shifting seats. My hands tightened on my knees, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't stand, didn't cry. I just stared at the edge of the stage, every inch of me burning. Caleb didn't move. A woman behind me muttered, "At a graduation?" Another voice hushed her. Vincent rambled on. Something about legacy, focus, the future. I couldn't hear it anymore. My badge felt like it was searing through my jacket. I stood, not rushed, not shaking, just steady, and walked out of the tent. The June sun hit my face, but it didn't warm me. I kept walking, the weight of that word, guest, trailing me like a ghost. The reception was in a sleek MIT hall, all glass walls and chandeliers, the kind of place that made you feel small if you weren't holding a champagne flute. I wandered toward the Ellis family table, my badge, guest, still pinned to my jacket like a scarlet letter. The name cards were neatly arranged: Vincent, Margaret, Caleb, even our second cousin who barely showed up to holidays. But not mine. I stood there, staring at the empty space where my name should have been, my chest tight, like I'd forgotten how to breathe. A friend of Caleb's from high school spotted me across the room. "Nora, I thought this was family only. Margaret said they were keeping it tight." She smiled, awkward, like she'd just stepped on my foot and didn't know how to apologize. On the table was an ivory card, gold embossed, the kind Margaret loved for her galas. I picked it up, my fingers trembling just enough to notice. "To our only son, Caleb, with all our love, Mom and Dad." The words landed like a slap, but quieter, the kind that stings long after the sound fades. Something inside me didn't break. It tilted, like a picture frame knocked just off center. A woman in a floral dress brushed past, glancing at my badge. "Oh, are you with the catering team? You're not wearing the family pin." I looked down at the word guest. No name, no trace of me. I forced a smile, grabbed the card, and slipped it into my purse. It wasn't stealing. It was proof. I didn't head straight home. I walked Cambridge's streets, past families spilling, out of restaurants, past a little boy with an MIT balloon tied to his wrist, past laughter that felt like it belonged to another world. Back in my apartment, I tossed the graduation program onto my kitchen table. It skidded, pages fanning open to a photo. Margaret and Vincent with Caleb, all three smiling under a banner that read, "MIT Class of 2025. The caption said, "A proud moment for the Ellis family." I wasn't in it. Not a shadow, not a mention. I stood there, staring, until the edges of my vision blurred. That night, I pulled an old photo album from the shelf, one I hadn't touched in years. It was from Caleb's high school graduation 8 years ago. Margaret had told me not to come. "It's his moment, Nora. Don't make it about you." I flipped to the tribute ad they'd bought in the yearbook, full page, glossy. "To our son, Caleb, who makes us proud every day." There was a photo of them on our old porch, spring light filtering through the trees. I remembered that day. I'd been there, standing next to Caleb, wearing a sundress Margaret picked because she said it flattered my eyes. But in the album, I was gone, cropped out so cleanly you'd never know I'd existed. They didn't just forget me, they erased me. Monday morning, I went to work, if you can call it that. Freelance writing means pitching stories to editors who rarely reply, hunched over my laptop in a coffee shop because my apartment's too quiet. No one mentioned the graduation. The Ellises were experts at keeping their shine untarnished, and I'd never been one to air their laundry. But then Sarah, a barista who followed Caleb on social media, grinned at me. "Your brother's MIT post was epic. Were you there?" I managed a nod. "Yeah, just in the background, like always." She didn't catch the weight in my voice, just handed me my latte. Later, a client who'd once golfed with Vincent passed me in the co-working space. He gave a curt nod, eyes sliding away. Another woman, someone I'd pitched an article to, pretended to check her phone as I walked by. They weren't mean. They just didn't see me. It wasn't one thing. It was 1,000. Holiday cards with only Caleb's face, his smile framed like a trophy. Family newsletters where my name was tucked in a corner, like an afterthought they forgot to delete. A fundraiser dinner where Margaret introduced Caleb as our only child, while I sat at a table in the back, picking at my salad. That card I took from the reception wasn't just paper. It was every moment they'd written me out of every time I'd told myself it didn't matter. But it did. And when I slipped it into my purse, I wasn't just holding on to hurt. I was holding on to the truth. I didn't cry that night. I could have. God knows the weight of that graduation card was enough to break me. But instead, I got quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like the air before a storm. Rain tapped against my apartment window, soft at first, then steady, like it was urging me to do something. I pulled my laptop onto the kitchen counter, the screen's glow cutting through the dark. I still had access to the Ellis Foundation's shared drive from a few years back when I'd written grant proposals for them. They never bothered to lock me out. Typical Margaret and Vincent, they erased people with words, not tech. I scrolled through folders at first without purpose, just clicking, donor lists, tax filings, meeting notes. My eyes were heavy, but my heart wouldn't let me stop. Then I saw it, a folder labeled Property Updates. Inside was a PDF, Main Estate Transfer Final. My name, Nora Jane Ellis, typed above a signature that wasn't mine. The N was too sharp. The J too curled, like someone had tried to mimic me and failed. Notarized by our cousin Lucas, who probably did it for a pat on the back from Margaret. I opened an old freelance contract from my files, one I'd signed for a magazine. My real signature stared back, nothing like the fake. I sat there, my coffee gone cold, the rain louder now. This wasn't just a slight. It was a crime. The main house was my grandmother's, a cedar-shingled retreat on a rocky coast, left to me in her will. I'd spent summers there as a kid, scrubbing salt off the porch, reading novels under the pines while Grandma Nora, my namesake, made blueberry jam. It was the one place I'd felt like I belonged. They'd sold it, no discussion, no warning, and funneled the money into Caleb's AI startup. I grabbed my phone and called Aunt Ruth, the only Ellis who'd ever treated me like I had a right to exist. It was late, but she picked up, her voice raspy with sleep. "Nora, honey, you okay?" "Not really," I said, my throat tight. "I found a transfer for the main house. My name's on it, but I didn't sign anything." Silence stretched, then she sighed. "Oh, Nora, I thought it was just paperwork. Margaret said they were tidying up for tax season." "They forged my signature," I said. Another pause. "I should have said something," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. You know how Margaret is. She steamrolls everyone." I hung up, my hands shaking. Not from sadness, but from something sharper. By morning, I was still at it, cross-referencing property records, bank transfers, emails. The house had been sold to a holding company tied to Caleb's startup. No family email, no dinner table talk, just a quiet erasure, like I'd never been a beneficiary. Caleb's website bragged about legacy-driven tech, with photos of him in sleek offices. Grandma Nora would have hated it. She'd loved that house for its simplicity, not its price tag. I needed to clear my head. I walked to a bookstore in my neighborhood, hoping the smell of paper would calm me. But as I turned into the memoir aisle, I heard a voice. "Nora!" It was Mrs. Thornton, Margaret's old bridge partner, holding a self-help book with a serene cover. She smiled, all teeth. Caleb's startup is just soaring, isn't it? Margaret says he's putting the Ellis name on the map. I forced a nod. Funny, I thought that main house was still ours. Her face flickered, just for a second, like she'd let slip a secret. Oh, well, you know parents, she said, waving a hand. Always making moves without telling the kids. She hurried off, clutching her book like a shield. I stood there, my pulse loud in my ears. She knew something. They all did. Later that day, a text pinged from an old college friend, someone I hadn't seen in years. Heard your folks sold the main place. Caleb's killing it. Kinda jealous. Jealous? The word tasted like ash. People saw Caleb's shine, his polished posts, his startup's buzz. They didn't see the cost, what they'd taken from me to prop him up. It wasn't just a house. It was every summer I'd spent believing I was part of something, every memory they'd rewritten to make me disappear. I went back to my apartment and kept digging. I found an email thread buried in the Foundation's drive, one Margaret probably thought was deleted. It was from her to Vincent, subject line blank. Caleb's the face we need. Nora's too erratic. Better to keep her out of the narrative. Another email from Vincent to a lawyer. Make sure the transfer's clean. She won't notice. And then, a recording from a donor meeting I'd pulled from an old backup. Margaret's voice, crisp and certain. We only use Caleb's image for the Foundation. Nora doesn't fit the brand. Vincent chuckling. She used to read everything we sent her. My stomach twisted. They weren't just erasing me. They were betting I'd stay too broken to fight back. I printed the documents, every damning page, and stacked them in a folder. The rain had stopped, but the air in my apartment felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was awake. And I knew exactly where I was going next. I drove to Margaret's office the next morning, the folder of printed documents heavy on the passenger seat. The Ellis Foundation's building was all glass and sharp angles, like it was designed to intimidate. I'd been here before, years ago, dropping off grant proposals I'd written for free, hoping Margaret would notice I was good at something. She never did. The receptionist, a young woman with a nervous smile, asked if I had an appointment. I didn't answer, just walked past, my boots echoing on the marble floor. Margaret's office door was open. She looked up from her desk, not surprised, like she'd been expecting me to show up eventually. Nora, she said, her voice smooth as silk. This is a surprise. I need to talk, I said, standing in the doorway. She gestured to a chair across from her desk, but I didn't move. I regret that you felt hurt, she started, folding her hands. But we made choices for the family's image. There it was, the apology that wasn't. You regret how it looked, I said, my voice steady despite the fire in my chest. Not what you did. Her lips tightened, just for a second. You're still welcome at our events, Nora, as a guest. It's about presenting a united front. It's about control, I shot back. You don't get to rewrite me out of my own life. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes cold. We can't have every voice shouting at once. People talk. Good, I said. Let them. I turned and left, the folder still clutched in my hands. She didn't call after me. She didn't need to. I already knew where she stood, always behind Caleb, always in front of a spotlight. A week later, I went to the Foundation's annual gala. I'd RSVP'd months ago, back when I still thought I had a place in their world. My badge read N. Jane. Guest. No trace of Ellis. The ballroom was a sea of glittering dresses and clinking glasses, donors and board members buzzing with small talk. I kept to the edges, invisible in my plain black dress. Halfway through dinner, Vincent stood raising his glass. To our only son, Caleb, whose vision lights our family's path. The room toasted, glasses sparkling. Caleb smiled, but his eyes found mine across the room, flickering with something. Guilt, maybe. He didn't correct Vincent. He just sipped his champagne. I didn't raise my glass. I didn't stay for dessert. I walked out, the badge burning a hole in my pocket, and decided I was done waiting for them to see me. Back home, I sent the folder to Diane Harper, the family's longtime lawyer. Every document, every email, the recording of Margaret's voice saying, "We only use Caleb's image. Nora doesn't fit the brand." Vincent's chuckle. She used to read everything. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth to breathe. The next morning, my phone lit up with notifications. A nonprofit watchdog site had published a story. Ellis Foundation faces allegations of fraud and nepotism. The article didn't name me, but it quoted emails I'd found, cited the forged signature on the main house transfer, and played Margaret's voice from the donor meeting. Donors started pulling out by noon. 2 board members resigned. Caleb's startup, tied to the foundation's funds, lost a major investor. The internet tore into it, comments flooding in. This is what happens when you erase people for optics. For the first time, I wasn't the one left out. I was the one they couldn't ignore. Then came the twist, and it hit like a wave I didn't see coming. Late that night, Diane emailed me a scanned document from the foundation's files, one I hadn't found in my search. It was a secondary transfer form for the main house, signed by Caleb, dated a year ago, the day after he'd been in a car accident. I remembered that week. He'd totaled his car, walked away with a concussion and a prescription for anti-anxiety, meds. The signature was his, but it was shaky, the lines uneven, like he'd barely held the pen. A note from Diane explained. Caleb had signed it during a closed meeting with Margaret, no lawyer present. He hadn't known what it was. Margaret had told him it was routine, a formality to protect the family. He'd been too rattled to question her, too fragile to read the fine print. I sat on my couch, staring at the screen. My heart caught, somewhere between anger and something softer. Caleb had stood by while they erased me, smiled through Vincent's toasts, let me carry the weight of their lies. But he hadn't forged my signature. He hadn't sold the house. He'd been manipulated. 2, a pawn in Margaret's game, just like me. Was he a victim, or had he chosen to stay blind because it was easier? I didn't know. All I knew was that the truth wasn't as clean as I'd thought, and it made what came next harder. The courtroom was nothing grand, just scuffed benches, a humming fluorescent light, and the faint smell of stale coffee. But to me, it felt like the edge of the world. Diane Harper, my lawyer, stood beside me, her folder of evidence neat and unyielding. Across the room, Margaret sat with her arms crossed, her face a mask of control. Vincent stared at the floor, his tie slightly crooked. Caleb slouched next to them, his eyes darting to me, then away, like he couldn't decide what he felt. The judge, a woman with gray streaks in her hair and a no-nonsense voice, called the hearing to order. Diane stood. Your Honor, we present Exhibits A through D, financial records of the main estate, proof of signature fraud, and recordings of exclusionary decisions by the Ellis Foundation. She laid out the forged transfer, my grandmother's will naming me the sole heir to the house and the donor meeting clip. Margaret's voice, cold and clear. We only use Caleb's image. Nora doesn't fit the brand. Vincent's chuckle. She used to read everything. The room went still, the words hanging like smoke. Margaret's jaw tightened. Vincent tried to speak. That will wasn't meant to be final, he said, his voice thin. The judge raised a hand. Documents don't bend to intentions, Mr. Ellis. Was it notarized? Diane didn't blink. Yes, Your Honor, by the original estate team. Margaret stood, her voice sharp. You're destroying us, Nora, after everything we've built. I stood too, my hands steady. I'm saving myself. The silence that followed was heavy, unbroken. Caleb looked at me, his face unreadable. Part guilt, part something I couldn't name. The judge's ruling came like a gavel in my chest. The main estate reverts to Nora Ellis. The Ellis Foundation's accounts are frozen pending audit. Caleb slipped out the door without a word. Vincent sank into his seat, pale. Margaret's composure cracked, her eyes flashing with something close to fear. Diane leaned in as we sat. You okay? I didn't answer. The judge's words echoed. Nora Ellis, the rightful heir. They'd taken my place, my name, my home. But I'd taken back something they couldn't touch, my truth. 6 months later, I stood in the main house, its old cedar walls now a writing haven for orphaned teens. I'd poured my grandmother's inheritance into it. No press, no ceremony, just a quiet choice to make something new. The kids scribbled poems in notebooks, their voices mingling with the ocean's hum. A plaque by the door read, For Nora, and those who refuse to vanish. I traced the letters, feeling my grandmother's warmth in every word. Margaret and Vincent never reached out. The foundation crumbled under audits, its gala canceled, its name a whisper in newsletters. Caleb surprised me, though. A letter arrived, his handwriting jagged. I didn't know, Nora. I was too weak to ask. I'm sorry. I didn't write back. I tucked the letter in a box with the gala badge, not as a wound, but as a marker of what I'd walked through. They didn't define me anymore. One afternoon, a girl, maybe 14, handed me a pen she'd carved, my name etched in wobbly letters. For you, she said, because you showed up. I pinned it to my coat, right where the Ellis crest once sat. It was heavy, real, mine. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't about erasing the hurt or waiting for them to change. It's letting go of the ache that they'll ever understand. My scars don't bleed now. I stopped picking them. The silence around me isn't empty anymore. It's mine, and it holds me.